Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The fluorescent lights above the interrogation room buzzed like angry insects, casting a harsh glare on the pale, chipped walls. Lieutenant Commander Zara Calhoun stood rigid, her Navy uniform pressed to perfection, metals gleaming like cold steel against her chest. Across from her, four men in black tactical vests circled like predators, the metallic click of their holsters echoing against the concrete floor. "Take off your uniform," the lead interrogator ordered, voice low, sharp as a whip. The words weren't a question, they were a challenge meant to strip her of everything she was. Zara's eyes narrowed, scanning their faces. Every second stretched. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck, not from fear but from the weight of the unspoken. They didn't know who they were dealing with. She smirked, slow and deliberate, letting her confidence be both shield and weapon. "You just told a Navy SEAL to strip," she said, her voice steady. The room froze. The audacity hung in the air like smoke. One of the men blinked, breaking his composure for just a fraction of a second. Zara didn't move, didn't flinch. Her hand rested lightly on the handle of her sidearm, a motion so subtle it would be almost invisible to an untrained eye. A gust of stale air rattled the single window high above. Outside, the city hummed with oblivious life, unaware that somewhere underground, a storm was about to break. The interrogator stepped closer, boots clacking against the concrete, the scent of sweat and leather mixing in the enclosed space. "We don't have time for your games," he hissed. "Strip. Now." Zara's lips curved into a faint, sardonic smile. Every fiber of her being was tense, ready. Memories flashed, a choppy sea in the Mediterranean, night vision goggles illuminating enemies' eyes like fireflies, comrades lost in silence, the bitter taste of betrayal, the steel of cold dawn cutting across her face. She had been through worse. Much worse. Her smirk widened. "You want me naked? That's amusing." Her words were calm, controlled, but each syllable carried the weight of authority, experience, and danger. She wasn't bluffing. These men had made a fatal mistake, underestimating her, thinking a woman could be intimidated. They had no idea what they had provoked. Suddenly one of the men lunged. Instinct and training merged into a single fluid motion. Zara pivoted, catching his wrist mid-strike, twisting until a sharp snap of metal echoed as his gun clattered to the floor. She moved like a predator in a cage, precise, lethal, each breath measured. Her eyes darted to the others, noting the tension in their muscles, the silent calculations behind their eyes. Time slowed. The room held its collective breath. One wrong move and it would turn into carnage. Yet Zara stood like a statue of defiance, unwavering. The smirk never left her face. In that moment she wasn't just a Navy SEAL. She was every challenge she had ever faced, every wound that had hardened into armor, every mission that had taught her not to flinch. Then, with a motion so smooth it looked like art, she drew her sidearm. Not to fire yet, but to make a point. They weren't going to take her uniform, her dignity, or her life without paying a price. The lead interrogator froze, realizing the tables had turned in a heartbeat. Fear was now theirs, and Zara's smirk said it all. The game had only just begun. The clock ticked, the fluorescent light flickered, and outside the city moved unaware. But down here, in the cold, claustrophobic room, a Navy SEAL had just declared war on anyone foolish enough to think she could be broken. And this was only the beginning. The faint hum of the city above had always been Zara's lullaby and her curse. She remembered the first time she had wanted to walk away from the uniform, to escape the weight of expectation pressing against her chest. Her father, a retired Navy officer with hands scarred from decades at sea, had looked her in the eye and said, "Zara, the uniform is never just fabric. It's every promise you've made to the people you protect. Every oath you've taken. It's heavier than you think." She had laughed then, thinking the weight could be shrugged off like a coat. But when the Mediterranean storm hit, waves taller than a 3-story building, and the crew screamed as the deck slipped beneath them, she understood. The uniform was steel, stitched into her skin, welded to her soul. It was the night spent in freezing rain, crawling through mud, listening to the desperate gasps of a teammate she couldn't save. It was the price of standing when everyone else would fall. Zara's mind drifted back to the infamous training camp in Kodiak, Alaska. Fog clung to the jagged cliffs, and the wind tore through the camp like knives. She had been 16, the youngest candidate in her squad, constantly underestimated. Her instructors tried to break her with sleep deprivation and impossible physical trials. Some days she would collapse on the rocks, frost forming in her lashes, hands numb, lungs screaming. Yet she refused to yield. One night, soaked and trembling, she had whispered to herself, "If they want steel, I'll give them titanium." That promise had carried her through every mission, every firefight, every humiliation that followed. Her earliest deployments were a blur of hostile territories, unfamiliar cities, and enemies who underestimated her. In Beirut, she had faced men twice her size who laughed at a young woman in uniform walking into a combat zone. Their laughter had turned into screams once she had cornered them with nothing but a silenced pistol and nerves of iron. In Kandahar, a sniper had locked onto her team, and she had dived into the dust, calculating every step, every heartbeat, until she had turned the tables, leaving the enemy stunned and defeated. It was during these missions that she had learned the unspoken lesson every SEAL knew. Fear was a weapon and doubt was an invitation. The moment someone thought they could command you, order you to strip, to break, to betray yourself, you could either submit or remind them why you existed. Zara had chosen the latter every time. Her memories shifted to the most personal betrayal, a fellow officer she had trusted, someone who had whispered promises and secrets, selling her team's movements to the highest bidder. The revelation had hit like a torpedo, leaving bodies and hearts in its wake. But it had also forged a cold clarity in her mind. Survival was not optional, and trust was currency she would never spend recklessly again. Now, standing in that dim, fluorescent interrogation room, those memories didn't overwhelm her, they focused her. Every flicker of doubt in the men before her was visible, a crack in their armor. She could see it in their twitching hands, the sweat beating at their temples, the split-second hesitation that came too late to save them. They believed power was in numbers and intimidation. Zara knew better. Power lived in preparation, in timing, and in understanding that fear could be wielded like a blade. The metallic clang from the shadows earlier had pulled her back to the present. Something had entered, unseen but palpable. Her muscles tensed like coiled springs, instincts kicking in. The men hadn't noticed yet. Most wouldn't. But Zara had already calculated, adjusted, prepared for every eventuality. She had survived storms, betrayals, ambushes, and death itself. This room, these men, they were only another test. A bead of sweat ran down her temple. She let it drip. Let it remind her that even steel could sweat under pressure, but only if it could bend and strike harder. Her smirk returned, sharper this time, cold as Arctic ice. "Let's see who's brave enough to make the next move," she murmured, voice low but carrying, resonating in the shadows. The room felt smaller now, every heartbeat amplified. Outside, the city continued, oblivious. Inside, a Navy SEAL's mind raced, tracking shadows, reading intentions, preparing for the storm that had just begun. The silhouette in the corner didn't move like a man, it moved like a shadow that had learned to breathe. Zara's gaze sharpened, trained to detect the subtlest anomalies. Every muscle coiled, every sense alive. The four interrogators hadn't noticed yet. Their focus was on her, a mistake that could cost them dearly. "Who's there?" the lead interrogator barked, his voice cracking under the strain of bravado. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it stepped forward, and the faint gleam of a tactical knife caught the light. Zara's mind raced. She calculated distances, possible trajectories, escape routes, and defensive maneuvers simultaneously. This was no random intruder. Whoever it was, they had a plan and they were confident. Zara moved first, subtly shifting her weight, her hand brushing the holster beneath her jacket. The men lunged, trying to trap her, but she pivoted, letting their momentum carry them forward. One crashed into the wall with a grunt, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sterile room. Another hesitated, eyes darting between her and the shadow, fear breaking the rigid discipline of training. The shadow advanced slowly, almost theatrically, revealing the faint insignia on a jacket, an emblem Zara recognized from past covert missions. A former ally? An operative? Questions flickered in her mind, but she didn't have time to process. Timing was everything. Her smirk never left her face. "Impressive," she murmured under her breath, loud enough for the nearest interrogator to hear. But predictable. With a sharp twist of her wrist, she disarmed the second man before he could react. The metallic clang of gun hitting floor was now joined by the metallic scrape of boots and knives. The room became a battlefield of shadows and reflexes. Zara's training dictated her moves. She used their aggression against them, letting momentum and overconfidence lead to their downfall. A sharp kick to the chest sent one man sprawling. A precise elbow shattered the grip of another. Through the chaos, the shadow remained distant, observing, calculating, not yet intervening. Zara's mind flickered to the orders that had brought her here. Take off your uniform. They hadn't just wanted her compliance, they wanted to humiliate, to assert dominance over someone trained to survive impossible odds. Every second she refused, every micro-movement that defied their expectation, chipped away at their authority. Then a voice sliced through the tension, low and controlled. Zara, don't underestimate me. The shadow stepped fully into the light, revealing a familiar face. Commander Elias Vorn, a former mentor she had believed dead in a covert operation gone wrong. Shock rippled through her, but she masked it instantly, folding it into her strategy. Betrayal, alliances, history, they were all weapons now. Elias? She breathed, her mind a tornado of disbelief, strategy, and adrenaline. Why? He smirked, the kind of smile that hid motives, secrets, and deadly intent. We have business to settle. You and them. His eyes flicked to the interrogators, a silent promise of chaos. In that instant, Zara realized the stakes had multiplied. This wasn't just an interrogation, it was a trap, a test, and a reckoning all at once. The men in black, already beaten into hesitation, now faced an invisible enemy whose loyalty was as unpredictable as fire in the wind. Zara's heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the room, a pulse of tension, strategy, and impending action. She had survived storms, ambushes, and betrayals before, but this combined every threat into a singular moment. And as she took a measured step toward Elias, sidearm ready but unraised, she understood one thing. She had the advantage only because she expected the unexpected. Her smirk returned, sharper, colder, ready to cut through the uncertainty. Let's see who survives the night, she said, voice echoing off the walls. Zara's pulse had barely a moment to settle before memories collided with the present. Elias Vorn wasn't just any operative. He had been her mentor, the man who had first taught her to see beyond instinct, to anticipate the chaos before it struck. He had trained her in the frozen mountains of Kyrgyzstan, where the wind cut like knives and the snow swallowed mistakes. Every lesson he had given her now flashed in her mind, each one tinged with betrayal she hadn't yet processed. Their first mission together had been brutal, a hostage situation in the outskirts of Damascus, 24 lives hanging by a thread while insurgents prowled the city like wolves. Elias had trusted her, leaned on her intuition, and in the end, it had saved lives, including his. He had said, Zara, a SEAL doesn't just fight, a SEAL predicts, adapts, survives. She had taken that to heart, believing in him completely. But trust is fragile, and betrayal has a way of resurfacing when least expected. 3 years ago, she had received intelligence that Elias had gone rogue, missing in action during an operation in Libya. The official reports claimed he was dead, lost to a covert strike gone wrong. Zara had mourned, silent tears in the quiet of her quarters, feeling the absence of guidance, of someone who had shaped her into more than just a soldier. She blamed herself for surviving when he hadn't, for not being able to protect him from the fire that had taken everything. Now, seeing him standing in that room, alive and unyielding, she felt a swirl of emotions she couldn't afford. Shock, anger, grief, confusion. His face was older, the lines etched deeper from years of hardship, but his eyes, the piercing, calculating eyes, were the same. The man she had admired, trusted, and lost was now an unknown variable, a ghost returned with motives she could only guess at. Elias stepped closer, each movement precise, calculated, radiating the same quiet authority that had once inspired her. You've grown stronger, he said, voice low, deliberate. But strength alone won't save you tonight. You'll need more than skill, Zara. You'll need choices. Hard choices. She kept her stance solid, refusing to let the tide of memory wash over her. Choices? You left me with nothing but questions before. Now you come back like a shadow, expecting loyalty? Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried the weight of betrayal, of wounds that had never healed. He didn't flinch. I never expected loyalty. I expected survival. And tonight we test both. His eyes flicked to the 4 remaining interrogators, whose panic now mirrored the chaos in the room. He had orchestrated this trap, this test, and somehow Zara knew he had foreseen every reaction. Her mind raced back to another lesson, the importance of reading the room, of anticipating not just the enemy's actions, but their intentions, their fears, their hidden alliances. That lesson had saved her countless times, and it would do so again tonight. She realized that Elias' return wasn't just a shock, it was a challenge, one she couldn't ignore. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of unspoken history. Every shadow, every flicker of light, Every movement became a battlefield. Her gaze met Elias. The years of mentorship, the missions survived, the pain of his absence, all of it boiled into a single, unyielding truth. She couldn't trust him, but she couldn't dismiss him either. And as the four men in black scrambled, unsure who to confront first, Zara made a decision. She would play his game, but on her terms. Every move, every strike, every counter would be deliberate. She would honor her past, her training, and the woman she had become. Someone who survived by seeing the world in angles and edges, shadows and light. Her smirk returned, subtle but sharp, a weapon as much as any gun. "Let's see if your old pupil has learned anything," she murmured, voice carrying steel. "Or if this ghost you've become is ready to regret showing up." The hum of movement in the shadows became audible, footsteps, soft and deliberate, blending with the erratic breathing of the four interrogators. Zara's eyes flicked from Elias to the newcomers, tracking every twitch, every subtle shift. She understood now, this wasn't just a test of strength or skill. It was a psychological battlefield. And she thrived in these conditions. The first interrogator lunged, desperation etched into his features. Zara sidestepped, letting momentum betray him, and his body slammed against the concrete wall with a brutal crunch. The room seemed to contract with the sound, every movement magnified in the cold, fluorescent light. She pivoted, eyes catching another pair of hands reaching for weapons. Before they could fully react, she struck, a quick series of movements trained into her muscle memory, sending two men sprawling, their guns clattering across the floor. Elias watched silently from the corner, assessing, calculating. "Control the room first," he murmured, almost as if giving a lecture. But Zara ignored him, focusing on the living chaos in front of her. She had learned long ago that hesitation could be fatal. Every moment wasted was an advantage given to the enemy. A metallic scrape sounded behind her. One of the shadowed figures moved too quickly and instinct took over. Zara pivoted, catching the attacker with a precision strike that sent the knife skittering across the floor. In one fluid motion she grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and forced him to his knees. The fear in his eyes mirrored that of everyone else, a silent acknowledgement that they had underestimated her. Then as she surveyed the room, her gaze caught Elias' expression. It was the same look he had once given her during their training exercises, a combination of challenge and approval. "You're ready," he said quietly. "But ready doesn't mean invincible." Her lips curved into a faint smirk, hiding the churn of adrenaline and emotion inside her. She didn't have time for nostalgia, not when survival demanded absolute focus. With a flick of her wrist, she disarmed another interrogator, the sharp clang of metal on concrete echoing like a gunshot. Every movement was deliberate, economical, and precise. She had become a storm contained within human form, and the room was about to learn that storms were unpredictable and deadly. From the far corner, a new sound emerged, a low, mechanical hum. Zara's instinct screamed danger. Elias' eyes met hers, a silent warning. The trap was far from over. Behind the remaining men, something had activated. She didn't have to see it to know. It was engineered to kill, precise and cold. One interrogator scrambled for cover, but it was too late. Zara's hand flicked to her sidearm, aiming just past the man to force him back, giving her space to assess the threat. She calculated angles, distances, and timing with the same focus that had kept her alive in deserts, mountains, and urban war zones. Then the unseen device revealed itself. A compact, automated turret descending from the ceiling, swiveling toward any movement. The room transformed from a battlefield of men to a high-stakes arena of precision. Every step, every breath, every twitch could trigger a lethal response. Zara's mind went into overdrive. She remembered lessons from Elias. Anticipate the unexpected, use the environment, control the flow of battle. Sliding low along the floor, she used shadows and debris as cover, moving with a predator's grace. Every shot fired by the turret was predictable, every movement deliberate. She counted heartbeats, measured distances, and when the moment was right, she struck. A precise kick toppled the turret's base, sending sparks and smoke into the air. The room erupted into chaos. The interrogators screamed, some diving for cover, others frozen in disbelief. And through it all, Zara moved like liquid steel, controlled, unyielding, unstoppable. Elias stepped forward finally, clapping slowly, almost mockingly. "Well done," he said. "But the night isn't over. You think this was the hardest part?" Zara's eyes narrowed, the smirk returning sharper than ever. "Then show me the rest." Zara's eyes flicked to the second device, the high-powered laser now cutting lethal arcs toward every exit. The room, once a controlled battlefield, had transformed into a maze of death. Sparks danced across the walls, smoke curling like ghosts of past conflicts. She calculated angles in milliseconds, every heartbeat marking a potential fatal mistake. Survival demanded more than reflexes now, it demanded strategy. The 4 interrogators scrambled in panic, their bravado evaporating like mist. One of them, a younger man with a scar running down his jaw, whispered under his breath, "She's impossible." The words were both fear and recognition. Zara didn't respond. She had learned long ago that words were weapons only when timed correctly. Actions spoke louder, and her actions were lethal precision. Elias moved closer, observing, studying her like a chess master contemplating the next move. "There's a traitor among them," he said quietly, almost to himself. The words sank into her mind. One of these men had led her into this trap, had orchestrated not just the interrogation but the devices, the setup, everything. Betrayal was nothing new, but inside a room where every misstep could be lethal, betrayal was explosive. Her gaze swept across the room. Subtle tells, the way one man avoided eye contact, the twitch of another's fingers near the laser controls, revealed the answer. The youngest interrogator, the scar-faced one, hesitated at a critical moment, almost imperceptibly. That hesitation was enough. Zara's training, her instincts, screamed the truth. He had been feeding information, calculating angles, predicting her every move. She didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion she lunged, knocking him to the floor before he could react. A sharp twist of her wrist sent his weapon clattering away. "Thought you could play me?" she hissed, her voice low, dangerous. His eyes widened, fear flooding in too late. The remaining men froze. 2 of them had underestimated her. One had overestimated loyalty. All 3 now realized the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Zara's presence was a storm contained in human form, and the room trembled under it. Elias' lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "You see, Zara? Even betrayal can be anticipated. Even traitors are predictable when you know where to look." His voice was calm, almost intimate. Yet beneath that calm lay danger, the subtle implication that the game was far from over. Zara didn't respond verbally. She had learned words were cheap, movement was currency. She disarmed another interrogator with a quick, precise strike, sending him sprawling against the wall. The device continued its deadly arcs, forcing her to move continuously, slide along shadows and exploit every cover. She felt her heart in sync with the room, calculating, reacting, surviving. The scar-faced traitor scrambled to recover, lunging for the laser controls. Zara twisted, sending a sharp elbow into his chest. The device wavered, sparks flying as it malfunctioned temporarily. He stumbled back, gasping, realizing he had underestimated her decisively. Elias finally stepped fully into the room, tension in his posture. "Impressive," he said quietly, voice carrying over the chaos. "But the lesson tonight is just beginning. The question isn't whether you can survive the threats in this room, it's whether you can control the fear, the deception, the human element. Everything you've learned so far is just a prelude." Zara's smirk returned, sharper than steel. "Then bring it on. I've survived storms, betrayals, ambushes, and I'm not finished yet." Every word was a promise, every breath a weapon. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then the second device reignited, its deadly arcs tracking the remaining men. Panic surged. The human element, the traitor, the hesitation, the fear, was now their undoing. Zara moved with surgical precision, turning every moment of chaos into opportunity. The low growl of the drone filled the room like a living predator. Its sensors glowed a menacing red, scanning, analyzing, ready to terminate. Zara's breath slowed, each inhale precise, each exhale a controlled rhythm. Training, instinct, and experience fused into one seamless mental map. She had faced explosives, snipers, and ambushes, but this machine demanded speed, accuracy, and composure all at once. The 4 remaining interrogators panicked, backing toward walls, their eyes darting between Zara and the descending threat. Elias remained calm, a quiet observer, letting the tension mount. He wanted her reaction and she gave him one, a measured smirk. Fear would not dictate her actions. Not tonight. Not ever. Zara assessed the drone's trajectory. The automated weapon relied on motion patterns and predictive algorithms, but it lacked intuition. She had something no machine ever could: creativity under pressure. Sliding low along the floor, she used the scattered debris from earlier chaos as cover. Every step was precise, calculated to bait the drone into recalculating its targeting. Sparks flew as the first rounds ricocheted harmlessly against the walls. Elias' eyes gleamed, a mixture of approval and challenge. "You've adapted fast," he said. "But can you anticipate the next layer?" Zara ignored him. Every second counted. The drone descended faster, sensors locking on, weapon systems primed. She needed to act and act now. Leaning to the side, she grabbed a fallen interrogator's pistol, twisting it expertly. With one sharp shot, she ricocheted a bullet off the wall toward the drone's sensor. Sparks exploded, momentarily blinding the automated eyes. The drone faltered, its pattern disrupted. Zara didn't pause. She moved with the fluidity of water, letting her momentum carry her behind cover while recalculating the next strike. The room erupted into chaos. Alarms buzzed, sparks flew, and the remaining interrogators screamed, realizing their carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling. Zara moved silently, almost eerily, disarming one man after another with precision strikes. The drone's weapon whirred again, targeting her with ruthless efficiency, but she was already ahead, exploiting its delays, forcing it to misfire repeatedly. Elias finally stepped forward, signaling with a subtle hand gesture. From the shadows, 2 more drones dropped silently. The room now was a nest of metal death, a test of reflex, intellect, and nerve. Zara's heart raced, but her mind remained razor-sharp. She knew the answer lay not in brute force but in control of her movements, of their expectations, and of the room itself. Using a combination of debris, her agility, and precise strikes, she toppled the first 2 drones. Sparks and smoke filled the air, a storm of chaos in which she was the calm eye. She anticipated the final drone's trajectory, pivoted at just the right angle, and delivered a kick that sent it crashing into the far wall, deactivated and smoldering. Silence fell suddenly. The room, once alive with the hum of machinery and panic, was now quiet except for labored breaths and the distant city above. Zara stood amidst the wreckage, her uniform singed in places, hair sticking to her sweat-dampened face. Her smirk returned, fierce and unyielding. She had survived, again, but the night was far from over. Elias stepped fully into view, clapping slowly. "Well done," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made the air vibrate. "You've handled threats with skill, but the ultimate test isn't machines, Zara. It's people. And some people are far more dangerous than any weapon." Her eyes narrowed, scanning his face. She knew the meaning behind his words. The final confrontation wasn't a mechanical test, it was a confrontation of trust, loyalty, and survival. The click of the hidden pistol echoed like a death knell in the room. Zara froze, every fiber of her body tensing. The weapon was aimed directly at her temple, the angle almost imperceptible. Her eyes darted to Elias. His smirk was infuriatingly calm, unreadable. The entire room had become a crucible of tension, where one wrong movement could cost lives. Hers, theirs, and even Elias. "Looks like the final test has arrived," Elias said, voice low but commanding. His presence radiated control. He didn't need to raise the weapon himself. The tension alone was a cage pressing down on her. Zara's mind raced. Every possible action, every movement, every counterstrike had to be calculated with split-second precision. One misstep and the room would erupt in fatal violence. Her eyes flicked to the 4 remaining interrogators. Most had been neutralized, some were groaning in pain. The youngest, scar-faced traitor, shivered on the floor, realizing the trap he'd helped orchestrate had turned decisively against him. Zara had to act, swiftly, decisively, and with absolute control. "Elias," she said evenly, keeping her voice calm, controlled. "You taught me to anticipate, to survive, to act before the enemy even knows what I'm thinking. So now let's see who's learned the lesson." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Confident. Well, exactly what I expected. But is it enough?" The seconds stretched like hours. Then Zara moved, not violently but with precision. She pivoted slightly, shifting her body just enough to alter the trajectory of the hidden pistol, her hand sweeping toward it in one fluid motion. The barrel clattered against the floor. The moment was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Elias' eyes narrowed, impressed. "Clever. But cleverness alone won't save you." She didn't respond. Instead, she pressed her advantage. Sliding along the floor, keeping low, she disarmed the remaining men with swift, decisive movements. The room, once a nest of chaos and mechanical threats, had become her chessboard. Every move she made forced her enemies into positions they couldn't escape. Then it was just her and Elias. The air between them crackled with tension. Years of shared history, mentorship, trust, and betrayal hung in the room like a storm waiting to break. She knew he had orchestrated this night not just to test her skills, but to challenge her emotionally, to see if she could balance instinct with intellect, survival with judgment. "You could have been my greatest ally," Elias said quietly, almost mournfully. "But tonight, we see who controls the battlefield. Who controls the mind." Zara's smirk returned, sharper than ever. "I control myself. That's always been enough." In a flash she lunged, not to attack but to disable. Her movements were fluid, a mix of speed, precision, and anticipation. Elias moved, countered, but she had predicted it. In a final, breathtaking maneuver she pinned him, sidearm aimed carefully, not to kill but to neutralize. The weight of her hand on the trigger was a statement. Control, dominance, survival. Elias froze. For the first time he seemed uncertain, impressed but defeated. "Well, you've done it," he admitted, a faint grin breaking his calm mask. "Not just survived but mastered everything I set before you. The uniform, the honor, the mind. You've become more than I could have imagined." Zara exhaled, tension leaving her body slowly. Then the lesson ends here. The interrogators, beaten but alive, watched in stunned silence. The machines had been destroyed, the room's traps neutralized, and the final confrontation resolved. Zara stood tall, uniform intact, metals gleaming, her presence radiating the calm authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. Zara's eyes narrowed with determination. "I've never been more ready." The room, once a battlefield of shadows, sparks, and deadly machines, had fallen into a tense silence. Zara stood amid the wreckage, uniform scorched in places, hair damp with sweat, but unbroken. The 4 remaining interrogators, now fully subdued, lay groaning on the floor. The scar-faced traitor's eyes darted nervously between her and Elias, realizing the full scope of his failure. Zara's gaze swept the room, cold and calculating. She had survived not just machines, ambushes, and betrayal, but the psychological gauntlet that Elias had laid before her. Every fear, every doubt, every flash of hesitation had been exposed, but she had turned it to her advantage. Survival wasn't just instinct, it was clarity, control, and precision. "Stand up," she commanded the traitor. His trembling form obeyed, fear etched into every line of his face. "You thought you could manipulate me, manipulate the mission, manipulate trust. You miscalculated." Her voice was calm, unyielding, but sharp enough to slice through the haze of fear that clouded the room. Elias watched silently, his arms crossed, tension in his posture. There was no malice in her eyes, only justice. "The world doesn't forgive incompetence," she continued, her tone measured. "And it doesn't forgive betrayal." She stepped closer to the traitor, eyes locked on his. "You're going to tell me everything, who sent you, why, and how far this goes. Any lies and you won't leave this room alive." The man's lips quivered, realization dawning too late. He had underestimated the discipline, intellect, and ruthlessness of a Navy SEAL who had been forged in fire, betrayal, and unrelenting adversity. Elias finally stepped forward, nodding slowly. "She's right," he said. "Survival is not just skill, it's judgment." Zara's decisions tonight weren't just tactical. They were moral. She's a SEAL in the truest sense. The traitor swallowed hard, voice shaking. I was sent by Director Kavanaugh. He wanted her removed. The operation, it was a test of loyalty." The revelation hung in the air like a storm. The orchestrated interrogation, the drones, the traps, all part of a larger scheme. Zara's jaw tightened. Director Kavanaugh's betrayal was no surprise. She had sensed his ambition, his willingness to manipulate anyone for power. But the clarity she felt now, after surviving the night, steeled her resolve. "Then the next move is simple," she said. "We take this evidence. We expose him. And we ensure he can never threaten anyone else again." Elias stepped closer, arms folding behind him. "You've proven more than your skill tonight. You've proven leadership, judgment, and resilience. The lessons you learned here will shape the missions to come. And perhaps, the world itself." His voice carried a rare softness, an acknowledgement of both her strength and her integrity. The traitor nodded rapidly, too terrified to resist. Zara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction, her breath slowing, adrenaline ebbing. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through mastery of circumstance. She turned her gaze to Elias. "The night is over," she said firmly. "And whatever past we had, it doesn't matter now. This ends here. We do what's right and we move forward." Elias studied her, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Perhaps," he admitted, You've surpassed even my expectations. I see now, the SEAL I trained has become something more. Someone unstoppable. Zara exhaled slowly, letting the tension fall from her shoulders. The room was silent, empty of traps, empty of chaos, but full of the weight of lessons learned and battles survived. Outside, the city moved, oblivious, but inside, a Navy SEAL had survived the ultimate test, not just of strength but of judgment, resilience, and humanity. The first light of dawn crept into the room, pale and quiet against the remnants of chaos. Dust hung in the air, shimmering in the weak sunlight that filtered through the high windows. Zara stood tall amidst the wreckage, her uniform scorched, hair damp and wild, but her posture unyielding. Every scar, every cut, every bead of sweat told the story of survival, strategy, and unbroken resolve. The traitor lay subdued, his will broken, his secrets spilled. Zara had ensured he could do no further harm. He was a symbol of what happens when ambition and betrayal collide with discipline and integrity. Justice had been served, not through anger but through precision and judgment. His plans, once lethal, now lay exposed, and the chain of corruption that had reached into her life was finally severed. Elias approached, hands still behind his back, his expression unreadable. For years he had been her mentor, her guide, and her shadow in the field. And yet, tonight had tested everything: loyalty, instinct, judgment, and morality. Zara had not only survived but dominated, turning every trap, betrayal, and mechanical threat into an advantage. "You've changed," Elias said quietly, almost reverently. "Stronger than I could have imagined. Smarter. And unstoppable." She looked at him, the years of mentorship, betrayal, and pain reflected in her eyes. "This ends here," she said firmly. "Whatever past we shared, whatever lessons you thought you were teaching me, I've learned them all. And now I move forward. You and I were done." He nodded slowly, acknowledging her words without resistance. "Then I'll leave you to it. The mission's outcome, your legacy, it's yours alone." His voice carried a weight of respect that words could barely contain. He turned and exited the room, leaving her standing among the wreckage, resolute and unshaken. Zara exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Outside, the city stirred, unaware of the storm that had raged within the four walls. She had survived not just the traps, the machines, and the men, but the emotional gauntlet of trust, betrayal, and expectation. She had proven above all that a Navy SEAL's true strength lies not in weapons or physical prowess, but in judgment, resilience, and the courage to confront both enemies and allies alike. She gathered the evidence, the recordings, the devices, the confessions. Every piece would ensure accountability, preventing the corruption from spreading further. Every detail was another victory, a confirmation that the chaos of the night had been transformed into justice. The sun rose higher, spilling golden light across her face. Zara allowed herself a rare moment of quiet, letting the victories and lessons of the night settle. She remembered the storms, the ambushes, the betrayals, the tests that had forged her into this unyielding force. Each had been a step toward this moment: clarity, triumph, and integrity intact. As she stepped out into the fresh morning air, Zara felt the weight of the uniform, heavy with responsibility, honor, and history. It was more than fabric. It was every promise kept, every oath honored, every challenge survived. She was more than a soldier. She was a symbol of unwavering strength, intellect, and courage. Her final glance back at the room, the sight of shadows, betrayal, and triumph, was a silent promise. Nothing would break her. Nothing could unseat her. And those who underestimated her, who tried to strip her of dignity or power, had learned a lesson that would resonate far beyond this room. Zara walked away, every step decisive, every heartbeat steady. She had faced darkness, machines, betrayal, and human malice, and she had emerged victorious. The dawn was hers, and with it came a new beginning, one defined not by fear or doubt, but by courage, integrity, and the unwavering spirit of a Navy SEAL who refused to be broken.